I'm Ben Greenman, an editor at the magazine, and I'd like to welcome everybody to the 7th Annual New Yorker Festival. You or your spouse has picked an excellent event tonight, so congratulations. I've introduced several of these types of readings over the years, and while I've never yet had to lie about the talents of the participants, there have been cases where I've had to put a little bit of extra butter on the toast. Tonight's not one of those cases. So what I'm going to do is read some brief biographical information about tonight's two readers. Whether or not you remember it is, I guess, in the long run irrelevant because you're certainly going to remember their readings. Gary Shteyngart, tonight's first reader, was born in Leningrad and emigrated to the United States as a child. His debut novel, The Russian Debutante's Handbook, won a Stephen Crane Award for First Fiction and a National Jewish Book Award for Fiction. His second novel, Absurdistan, was published in May. George Saunders, tonight's second reader, has written a number of books, including Civil War, Land in Bad Decline, Pastoralia, and In Persuasion Nation, which was published in April. Last month, he was awarded one of this year's highly coveted MacArthur Fellowships, which newspapers and the people who read them love to call the Genius Grant. As I said earlier, and I'll say at least one more time after this, you're in for an extremely rewarding night of sitting in a chair. The two authors you're going to hear tonight are not just skilled prose stylists and insightful observers of the human condition. They are hilarious in the most interesting sense of the word. They use humor as a weapon, a tool, a palliative, and a clarifying agent. I've had the pleasure of reading with Gary before, just a few weeks ago, in fact, and I can personally attest to the quality not only of his writing, but of his reading. George I haven't read with, but I've hungrily and admiringly acquired each of his books as it has been published. So get ready to laugh your brains out. So again, I'm very happy to introduce Gary Shteyngart first, then I'll come back out and introduce George Saunders. The pleasure is mine, and in a minute, it will be yours. So this is Gary.
Whew. Thank you so much. I think Ben raised the bar a little too high. You won't laugh your brains out. Not until George takes over. This is a really great honor for me. I've been dying to read with George Saunders since I was about this big, and today my dream has come true. I'm going to read from Absurdistan, which has my last book, well, last out of two. So it's very prolific in my 35 years. Absurdistan is the story of a very fat man who destroys a very small country. The fat man is named Misha Weinberg. He is about 325 pounds, son of the 1,238th richest man in Russia. And the country is called Absurdistan, and it's a small oil-rich republic administered by Halliburton. So as the story begins, we begin in the year 1990, and Misha is still 18 years old, and he's about 280 pounds, I would say. Back in 1990, my beloved Papa decided that his only child, me, should study to become a normal, prosperous American at Accidental College, located deep in the country's interior and safe from the gay distractions of the eastern and western seaboards. My Papa was only dabbling in criminal oligarchy then. The circumstances were not yet right for the wholesale plunder of Russia, and yet he had made his first $1 million off a Leningrad car dealership that sold many wretched things, but thankfully no actual cars. The two of us were living alone in a tight, humid apartment in Leningrad's southern suburbs. My mommy had recently died of cancer, and we were mostly staying out of each other's way because neither of us could understand what the other was becoming. One day I was masturbating fiercely on the sofa. My legs splayed apart so that I looked like an overweight flounder cut precisely down the middle. When my Papa stumbled in from the winter cold, his dark bearded head bobbing above a silky new western turtleneck, his hands shaking from the continual shock of handling so much green American money. "Put that thing away," he said, scowling at my purple member. "Come to the kitchen. Let's talk man to man." I hated the sound of man to man because it reminded me once more that my mommy was dead, and I had no one to wrap me up in a blanket at bedtime and tell me I was still a good son. I pocketed my genital, sadly letting go of the image that was driving me to pleasure. Olga Makarovna's enormous ass hanging over the wooden chair in front of me, our classroom rank with the farmer's cheese smell of unattained sex and wet galoshes. I sat down across the kitchen table from my papa, sighing at the imposition as would any teenager. Mishka, my papa said, soon you'll be in America, studying interesting subjects, sleeping with the local Jewish girls, and enjoying the life of the young. And as for your papa, well, he'll be all alone here in Russia, with no one to care if he's dead or alive. I nervously squeezed at my thick left breast, funneling it into a new oblong shape. I noticed a stray piece of salami peel on the table and wondered if I could eat it without Papa noticing. It was your idea that I should go to accidental college, I said. I'm only doing as you say. I'm letting you go because I love you, said my father, because there's no future in this country for a little popka like you. He grabbed the floating zeppelin of my right hand, my masturbatory hand, and held it tight between his two little ones. The broken capillaries of his cheek stood out beneath his graying stubble. He was crying silently. He was drunk. I started crying too. It had been 6 years since my father had told me that he loved me or wanted to hold my hand. 6 years since I had ceased being a pale little angel that adults loved to tickle and school bullies to punch and turn instead into a giant florid Jaime with big squishy hands and a rather mean-looking overbite. Almost twice the size of my father I was, which stunned us both pretty hard. Maybe there was some kind of recessive Polish gene on my miniature mother's side. Jasnowski was her maiden name, so new. I need you to do something for me, Mishka, Papa said, wiping his eyes. I sighed again, slipping the salami peel into my mouth with my free hand. I knew what was required of me. Don't worry, Papa, I won't eat anymore, I said, and I'll do exercises with the big ball you bought for me. I'll be thin again, I swear, and once I get to accidental college, I'll study hard how to become an American. Idiot, Papa said, shaking his double-jointed nose at me. You'll never be an American. You'll always be a Jew. How can you forget who you are? You haven't even left yet. Now, I had heard from a distant cousin in California that one can be both an American and a Jew, and even a practicing homosexual in the bargain. But I didn't argue. I'll try to be a rich Jew, I said, like a Spielberg or a Bronfman. That's fine, my papa said, but there's another reason you're going to America. He produced a smudged piece of graph paper scribbled with outlandish English script. Once you land in New York, he said, go to this address. Some chassids will meet you there, and they will circumcise you. Papa, no, I cried, blinking rapidly, for already the pain was clouding my eyes, the pain of having the best part of me touched and handled and peeled like an orange. Since becoming gigantic, I had gotten used to a kind of physical invincibility. No longer did the classroom bullies bang my head against the board until I was covered with chalk, as they shouted, Dandruffy Yid. According to Russian mythology, Jews suffer from excessive flakiness. No one dared touch me now, or wanted to touch me for that matter. I'm 18 years old, I said. My hui will hurt terribly if they cut it now. And I like my foreskin. It flaps. Your mama wouldn't let you get circumcised when you were a little boy, Papa said. She was afraid of how it would look to the district committee. Too Jewish, they'd say. Zionist behavior. She was afraid of everyone except me, that woman. Always calling me shit-eater in public. Always hitting me over the head with that frying pan. He looked toward the cupboard where the dreaded frying pan once lived. Well, now you're my responsibility, Popka, and what I say you will do. That's what it means to be a man, to always listen to your father. My hands were now shaking rhythmically along with Papa's, and we were both covered in sweat, steam rising in invisible white batches from our oily heads. I tried to focus on my father's love for me and on my duty to him, but one question remained. What's a Hasid, I said. Oh, that's the best kind of Jew there is, Papa said. All he does is learn and pray all day. Why don't you become a Hasid then, I asked him. Me? I have to work hard now, Papa said. The more money I make, the more I can be sure no one will ever hurt you. You're my whole life, you know. Without you, I would cut my throat from one ear to the other. And all I ask you to do, Mishka, is get snipped by these Hasids. Don't you want to please me? I loved you so much when you were small and thin. I recalled how my little body felt when encased in his wise brown eagle eyes eating me up, the worsted bristles of his mustache giving my cheeks a manly rash I would treasure for days. Some wags say that men spend their entire lives trying to return to their mother's womb, but I'm not one of those men. The trickle of Papa's deep vodka breath against my neck, those hairy, obstinate arms pressing me into his carpet-thick chest, the animal smells of survival and decay. This is my womb. And so a month later, I found myself in a livery cab, roaring down a terrifying Brooklyn neighborhood. In the Soviet Union, we were told that people of African descent were our brothers and sisters, but to the newly arriving Soviet Jews at the time, they were as frightening as armies of Cossacks billowing across the plains. I, however, fell in love with them at first sight. There was something blighted, equivocal, and downright Soviet about the sight of underemployed men and women, arranged along endless stretches of broken porch front and unmowed lawn. It seemed that just like my Soviet co-nationals, they were making an entire lifestyle out of their defeat. The Oblomov inside me has always been fascinated by people who are just about ready to give up on life. And in 1990, Brooklyn was still an Oblomovian paradise. Not to mention the fact that some of these young girls, already as tall and thick as baobab trees, were the most beautiful women I'd seen in my life. Gradually, the African neighborhood gave way to a Spanish-speaking section, equally disheveled, but pleasantly coated with the smell of roasted garlic. And that in turn gave way to the promised land of my Jewish co-religionists, men bustling around with entire squirrels' nests on their heads, side curls flapping in the early summer wind, velvety coats that harbored a precious summer stink. I counted 6 tiny boys, probably between 3 and 8 years of age, their blonde, untrimmed locks making them look like infant rock stars, running around a deeply tired penguin of a woman as she pattered down the street behind a scrim of grocery bags. What the hell kind of Jewish woman had 6 children, I thought to myself. In Russia, you had 1, 2, maybe 3 if you didn't care for constant abortions and were very, very promiscuous. The cab stopped in front of an old but grand house whose bulk was noticeably sinking into its front columns, the way an elderly fella sinks into his walker. A pleasant young chassid with an intelligent expression, then again I'm partial to anyone who looks half blind, welcomed me in with a handshake, and upon ascertaining that I spoke neither Hebrew nor Yiddish, began to explain to me the concept of a mitzvah, meaning a good deed. Apparently, I was about to perform a very important mitzvah. I sure hope so, mister, I said in my terrible English, because pain of dick cutting must be intolerable. Oh, it's not so bad, my new friend said. And you're so big, you won't even notice it. Then upon seeing my still frightened expression, he said, they'll put you under for the surgery anyway. Under, I said. Under where? Oh, no, mister. I must go back to my hotel room immediately. Come, said the chassid. I got something I know you're going to like. I followed him to the bowels of his house with my head hung low. After the typical drabness of the one-room Soviet apartment, with the bulbous refrigerator shuddering in the corner like an ICBM before launch, I found the Hasidic home to be a veritable explosion of color and light, especially the framed plastic picture of Jerusalem's golden Dome of the Rock and the crushed blue pillows embroidered with cooing doves. Later, when I was enrolled at Accidental College, I was taught to look down on these things. Everywhere there were books in Hebrew with beautiful golden spines, which I erroneously imagined to be translations of Chekhov and Mandelstam. The smell of buckwheat kasha and used underwear proved homey and inviting. As we progressed from the front of the house to the back, little boys ran between the tree stumps of my legs, and a young chesty woman with her head wrapped in a handkerchief popped out of a bathroom. I tried to shake her wet hand, but she ran away screaming. It was all very interesting, and I almost forgot the painful reason behind my visit. And then I heard a low guttural hum, like the sound of 100 octogenarians brooding at once. The hum gradually resolved itself into a chorus of manly voices, singing what sounded like, a chumas tov, a tzimas tov, a mazel tov, a tzimas tov, a chumas tov, a mazel tov, a chumas tov, a tzimas tov, hey, hey, Yisrael. Several terms I thought I recognized. Mazel tov is a form of congratulations. Tzimas is a dish of sugary crushed carrots. And Yisrael is a small, heavily Jewish country on the Mediterranean coast. What all these words were doing together, I couldn't begin to fathom. Ducking beneath a low frame, we entered the house's back annex, which was filled with young fedora-wearing men hoisting plastic cups along with slices of rye bread and pickles. I was given one such cup, slapped on the back, told Mazel Tov, then pointed toward an old bathtub reclining in the middle of the room on 2 sets of clawed feet. Vodka does not have a smell, but it didn't take long for an 18-year-old Russian to register that the bathtub was indeed filled with that substance, along with floating bits of onion. Now do you feel at home? The happy chassid shouted to me as I swigged from the plastic cup and chased the drink with a sour pickle. Your father told us you might need to drink some vodka before the bris, the lead chassid explained. So we decided to have a little party. Party, I said. Where are girls? The chassids laughed nervously. Here's to your mitzvah, one of them shouted. Today you will enter into a covenant with Hashem. Hashem, what is this? I asked. It's God, they whispered. Several cups worth, marveling at how the onion helped improve the mixture. And yet the idea of entering into a covenant with God did not go down as easily as the 80-proof swill. What did God have to do with it? I just wanted my father to love me again. Maybe you should take me to hotel, mister, I said. I give you $17 in my pocket. Please tell my papa I got cut already. He never looked down there anymore because now I am so fat. The chasas were not buying my suggestion. You have to think of us too, they chanted. This is a mitzvah for us. You also getting dick cut? No, we're redeeming the captive. Who is captive? You. You're a captive of the Soviet Union, and we're making a Jew out of you. And with that, they helped me to several more oniony vodkas until the room fairly blared at me with its twirling diorama of top hats and flying sweat. To the mitzvah mobile, the youngers shouted in unison. And soon I was shrouded in a dozen velvety coats, snug within the outer layers of my own race, while I was gently herded out into the Hasidic summer night, where even the yellow-faced moon wore side curls, and crickets sang in the deep melodious language of our ancestors. I was laid out sideways on a soft American van seat, several young men still plying me with vodkas, which I dutifully drank. Eventually, I was deposited into the overlit waiting room of a poor municipal hospital, where Spanish babies cried for milk, while my companions had pressed themselves against an ad hoc wailing wall, their pale faces red with prayer. Your father will be so proud, someone whispered into my ear. Look what a brave man you are. 18 is too old for cutting the dick, I whispered back. Everybody knows this. Abraham was 99 when he performed the bris with his own hands, I was told. But he was biblical hero, I said. And so are you. From now on, your Hebrew name will be Moshe, which means Moses. I am called Misha, I said. This is a Russian name my beautiful mother calls me. But you are like Moses because you're helping lead the Soviet Jews out of Egypt. I could almost smell the plastic of the cup pressed to my lips. I drank like the teenage alcoholic I had already become. A piece of rye bread was presented to me, but I spat on it. Then I was on top of a rolling bed wearing a kind of backwards dress. Then the rolling bed stopped. Green smocks billowed all around me. My pants were being roughly lowered by a pair of cold hands. Papa, make them stop, I cried in Russian. A mask was clasped over my face. Count backwards, Moses, an American voice told me. Niet, I tried to say. But of course no one could hear me. The world broke into pieces and failed to reassemble. When I finally did wake up, the men in black hats were praying over me, and I could feel nothing below the carefully tucked folds of flesh that formed my waistline. I raised my head. I was dressed in a green hospital gown, a round hole cut in its lower region, and there, between the soft pillows of my thighs, a crushed purple bug lay motionless, its chitinous shell oozing fluids, the skin rendering pain of its demise, held at bay by anesthesia. For some reason, my co-religionists thought that my vomiting was a sign of recovery. And they wiped my chin and laughed and said, Mazel Tov and Chumas Tov and Hey, hey, Yisrael. The infection set in that night.
All right, if you're here tonight, there's a good chance that you already know George Saunders' work. If for some reason you don't, you're about to be very lucky. I don't think there's any point in the long introduction. Please welcome George Saunders.
Thank you very much. And it's an honor to read with Gary. He's such a wonderfully funny guy and nice guy. He's not as mean as he seems on the stage. So I'd like to just close with a 10-minute actual short story called Three Trees. And I think it's pretty self-explanatory. The three trees along Lincoln Avenue that every spring bloom purple flowers had bloomed purple flowers. So what? What was the big deal? It happened every year. But Patty kept raving about them. Patty kept saying, look at the flowers, Ma. Aren't them flowers amazing? Patty was trying to kiss up. Ricky had flown in, and Patty had flown in. And what was the occasion? None. They were just trying to kiss up. Patty had taken her to lunch and now was holding her hand right on Lincoln Avenue. This girl who'd once slapped her own mother for attempting to adjust her collar was now holding her mother's hand. Patty said, Ma, these flowers, wow, they really blow me away. It was just like Patty to go out to a nice lunch in a T-shirt with a crossed-out picture of a machine gun on it. Once Patty had gone out to a nice lunch in a T-shirt with a crossed-out picture of a dead baby in the bottom of a pail on it. At least when they came in last night, neither of them had said, Ma, oh my God. Even back when Ricky's hair was long and even when Ricky's hair was short and looked nice and he dated that Eileen, even when that Eileen slept around and Ricky shaved his head, whenever Ricky and Patty came over, separately or apart, they'd always say, first thing, Ma, oh my God, which was rude. They had no right. If their father was alive, they wouldn't dare speak to her like that. When Patty had slapped her for adjusting her collar, Richard Sr. had given her such a wallop. The town looked nice. The flags were flying. Ma, did you like your lunch? Patty said. I liked it fine, Alma said. At least she didn't have an old lady voice. All the other old ladies she knew had old lady voices, but hers was just her same voice like when she was young. And nobody looked better than her in a tight black dress going for cocktails. Ma, said Patty, how about we walk up Pickle Street? What in the world? They've been out 3 hours already. What was Patty trying to do, cripple her? Ricky would be wondering where they were. Ricky had slept in. He'd just flown in, and boy, were his arms tired. That was what Richard Sr. always said after a trip. Ricky had not said that. Ricky did not have his father's wit. There ain't a Pickle Street anymore, Alma said. I know that, Ma, Patty said. I just mean see where it used to be. What an idiotic suggestion. Pickle Street was gone. Even the pickle factory was gone. Only the ice house part remained, and that was now a law firm. When she was a girl in the shack on Pickle Street, the town had been all farms. Her family had owned pigs. The pigs were not storybook pigs, round and pink. Their pigs were missing fur in places, had goiters, open sores. Their pigs would rush to the edge of the pen when they saw her and begin aggressively excreting. To feed the pigs, you slid with your slop pail down the long slope that overlooked the Broom Mansion. And once she slid down the slope in what Father called the pig shit boots, she looked up to see Catherine Broom and several tall, wealthy boys from her class, whose names she could not now recall, regarding her coolly. And as she scooped the spilled feed back into the pail, one boy raised a gloved hand in greetings and said, "Suey!" And the pigs rushed over and began noisily excreting at her. "We'll go home now," she said. "I want to go to the grave before it gets dark." Here in the crock of the first purple tree was a mug, and on the mug was a reindeer, a Christmas mug. In the bottom was some hardened coffee. "Ma," said Patty. Lines of mugs had come out of the factory side by side, each headed for a cozy pantry with occasional trips out, which would brighten its day. But not this poor dope. This poor dope had been left in a tree. Last night when Ricky and Patty came in, she'd said, "If you were to stay in my home, I insist there be no insulting crap like last time with the wheelbarrow." And they'd promised. In the portion of the bottom of the mug not covered with hardened coffee, you could see the reflected purple color of the flowers. In its day, this must have been about a $6 mug. Alma took the mug from the tree and handed it to Patty. "Oh, Ma," said Patty. It was, yes, a bit of a test. They'd have to pick up the pace if they were to make the grave by dark. At the grave, she would say, "Richard, everything's come out all right. Patty's holding my hand. Plus, she took me out to lunch. And she and Ricky have finally canned the crap. Realizing that being as how I'm their mother, I can live how I want. They have to respect my wishes." They passed the Manfrey place. Once in the Nixon years, lightning had hit the Manfrey cupola. In the morning, a portion of the cupola lay on the lawn. She had been walking Nipper. Richard Sr. did not walk Nipper, walking Nipper being too early. Richard Sr. at that time had been a bit of a drinker. Richard Sr. drank a bit with great sophistication. He could make a bra out of a napkin. At that time, Richard Sr. was selling a small device used to simulate tree growth. You attached it to a tree, and supposedly the tree flourished. When Richard Sr. drank a bit with great sophistication, he made up lovely words and sometimes bowed. This distinguished-looking gentleman would appear at your door a bit sloshed and ask, "Where are your trees, slaggard? Were they blagging behind the other trees? Did they need to be proterated?" And he would hold up the little device. And in this way, they had almost lost the house, because the efficacy of the tree simulators was nebulous. Richard Sr. had used those words in his low, drunk voice on the night it had appeared most probable they would lose the house. "Mother," he said, "the efficacy of our tree simulators is nebulous." Ma, Patty said. What? Alma snapped. What do you want? You stopped, Patty said. I know I stopped, she said. My knees hurt. My daughter dragged me hostage all around the town. Believe me, I know when I'm stopped. She hadn't known she'd stopped. She knew it now, however. She began walking again. The second purple-flowered tree was near the shop where the men cut pipe. When they'd nearly lost the house, little Ricky had come to their bed with a couple of pennies saying, will this help? Now he was nearly bald. For a living, he walked pets. And Patty worked at We Kill No Cows. That was the actual name. Inside smelled like hemp. On the walls were shirts with cartoon cows saying in cartoon balloons things like, thanks for not slamming a bolt through my head. And as children, they had been so bright. She remembered Ricky's achievement award. One boy wept because he hadn't got one. But Ricky got one. Yet they had turned out badly. Worked dumb jobs and were always talking about their feelings and had bloodied their mother. Last spring, she'd come in from the yard, and there was Ricky in the parlor filling a wheelbarrow with things from G, things from H. He said, Ma, enough is enough. Mr. Riley faxed me. Mrs. Ubernick called me. At that point, she, Alma, got a hot face and stormed out the front door. But being there was no porch, because it had rotted away and not been replaced, she not having a living husband to replace it, not having a son who could replace it, down she'd gone. And lying there in the grass bleeding, had felt extremely sorry for her children, because for all the difficulties in her youth, she had never bloodied her parents. On the contrary, even when mother would get lippy and father would shove mother around and eventually lash her to the stove with that hateful length of orange cord until mother had a chance to return to herself, she, Alma, had honored her father and mother by minding her own beeswax, by going out to the yard immediately to pray about it with her hands over ears so she didn't have to hear mother in the thin, shrill voice she used when scared, shouting, you have no right, Albert, you have no right. She didn't like remembering those things. Remembering those things made her feel critical of father and mother. Mother and father were dead, and if she remembered those things, she would find herself thinking in father's voice, Alma, my goodness, you're thinking ill of us when we're dead? She'd had chores. She wasn't spoiled. And she hadn't spoiled Patty and Ricky. That, at least, was not the source of their badness. Once, she had, in fact, left them at the zoo for disobeying. When she told them to stop feeding the giraffe, they'd continued. She'd left them at the zoo and gone for a cocktail. When she returned, Patty and Ricky were standing repentant at the front gate with their zoo balloons deflated. Which is why, a few months later, at Ed Pulaski's funeral, when with a single harsh look she ordered them to march past the open coffin, they had marched past the open coffin lickety-split with no shenanigans. Poor Ed Pulaski, it looked terrible. He'd been found in his kitchen after several days there on the floor. Ma, you okay? Said Patty. Don't be ridiculous, Alma said, and started decisively toward home. She loved the home she and Richard Sr. had made, so different from the Pickle Street house, so full of love. They would lie on the floor and discuss what colors to paint the walls. They did it every which way, and once he had spanked her bare bottom while she stood at the refrigerator. When she told Richard Sr. about the orange cord, he bought her a diamond for her birthday and put it on an orange cord and gave it to her hidden in a bouquet of flowers and said, my darling, there are to be no orange cords in this house except this one. And slipping the diamond off the orange cord, had dropped the orange cord in the trash and kissed the nape of her neck. But then the children had come, and they were bad. They cried and complained. They pooped at badly chosen times, stepped on broken glass, pulled down window shades while she lay happily on the floor with Richard Sr. discussing what color to paint the walls. And she'd have to rise exasperated, which spoiled everything. And when she came back, Richard Sr. would be out in the distant part of the yard having a minuscule perschnagel. He was the third purple-flowered tree, their tree, the tree in their side yard, and Patty was holding her hand tightly, too tightly, as if trying to slow her down. So many memories. She remembered crouching down just here, schnockered herself, waiting to leap out at Richard Sr. And when she did, she found him pantless. Those were the happy times, the times of the all-night parties. She knew this house so well. If she turned her head right now, she'd see, she knew, through the purple flowers, the 4 distinct yard groupings, 2 groups of L and 1 each of N and D. She had once calculated the total net worth of that which was in the yard over $1,000. And that had been years ago, $1,000. But when she turned her head, she didn't see a single grouping, only 3 county trucks. And in the beds of the trucks, a mob of shirtless young men sort of stomping things down. Now, Ma, Patty said, stay calm. Ricky came rushing up wearing work gloves. A shirtless young man went by pushing a wheelbarrow, and in the wheelbarrow were several blender tops and the 5 hardwood chicks she'd found in the Valueway dumpster. At the curb was a huge heap of, they'd mixed it all up. Several vases has already been broken. Things from A, things from L, things from unsorted, valuable things, things of value, things valuable to her. You promised, she shouted. And her legs gave way, and she sat in the grass thinking, tricked. I give you one freaking thing to do, Ricky said. You try it, said Patty. She's like a mule. Like a mule, she thought from the grass. Richard, do you hear how they speak of me? Everything did not come out all right, Richard. I stand corrected. Look how they treat me. They hate me. They're trying to kill me. They've always been trying to kill me, and now I am old and weak, and they're going to do it. Damn them to hell. She would walk to the grave. It was amazing how fast she was gone. Patty knew how it would go now. She'd fight a while with Ricky over who would go, and then she'd go. So she decided to skip the fight and just go. She went. The old mule was nowhere in sight. Sore knees, my ass. She could really book it. When she caught up to her, oh, God, she'd read her the riot act. Patty imagined the look in her mother's eyes as she was read the riot act. A panicked look, like a dog with its foot in a trap, so scared it would try to bite you, and would bite you. And when it saw it had bit you, this dog that was her mother would flinch behind the eyes if sickened as what it had done, but just for an instant, and then the eyes would go back to hard, and she'd be ready to bite again. Oh, Ma, Patty thought, it's late. If you're ever going to start liking me, you better do it now.
You treat language as something special and not the language you probably speak to your family or your near and dear or anything like that. Can you talk about your relationship to the language when you're doing your work?
Yeah, well, a lot of the stuff I've written thus far has taken place in Russia. So a lot of the dialogue first comes into my mind in Russian. And I'm very helpful. The good thing is that I speak to my parents all the time, and always in this kind of grumpy Russian. And I return to Russia every year, where my friends also speak in this kind of downcast Russian. And all my dreams are in Russian as well, especially the anxiety-producing ones where I can't get the money out of the ATM in Moscow.
The interesting thing about style was that I started out, I was from Chicago, this kind of working-class neighborhood, and there's actually a lot of poetry in Chicago, in that world, but I didn't recognize it for many years because I thought the idea was to get sort of above it, and acquire an exalted diction. But if you hear people in Chicago, they're wonderful praisers, of other people, but they do it in a funny way. They'll say, you fucking jagoff, you kick my ass. You do. You kick my ass. So for me, part of the becoming a writer was to sort of say, well, even though that seems like a anti-literary language, there is no such thing. So if any diction that there is, you should eventually be able to overflow it with meaning. So for me, that's been kind of the long trip, is to recognize that as a legitimate literary kind of language.
And did you ever think about maybe I should separate stuff that's not funny? Did you make a choice about writing humorous stuff?
Sure, I'll repeat the question just in case. The end of the question is, did you make a choice to write non-humorous stuff, or a choice about writing humorous stuff versus serious material? Go ahead.
Well, I actually had a long time where I was deliberately keeping anything funny out of it, and that was really not. There was nothing good coming out of it. It was too earnest and kind of flat. So, to me now, it's not. I don't really think in advance should this be funny or not. But also, when something comes, I make no effort to keep it out. So, like in that second piece, even though it's kind of I meant it sort of earnestly. When something uncomfortable or funny came in, you kind of look at it and you go, well, oh, shoot, I didn't mean that. This is supposed to be Chekhov. Okay, well, and then you make an energy assessment. You say, well, this joke that I just put in actually is more truthful than the kind of high-minded one I had before, so I'll just put it in. And
Well, I mean, I am in some ways, I guess, a satirist, and every satirist's dream is to live in a time when evil and stupidity collide. And, you know, I guess my predecessors, such as Sergei Dovlatov, if I may be so humble as to call him a predecessor, Sergei Dovlatov wrote about the 1970s in Brezhnev's Soviet Union, and I'm saddled with what we have right now. So a part of me longs for something a little different. I want to modulate my voice a little bit. With Absurdistan, I think I took it in one direction, and I think every novel is a process. Every nonfiction book is a process of trying to figure out just exactly what the tone should be. And one thing I don't want to do is just keep doing the same thing over and over again. So I think I want to find a much different voice for the next book, for example, that I'm writing about.
Is Hollywood beckoning?
Who, me? Beckoning? They put me on the plane back when I went. I'm not even allowed to land at Burbank, whatever that is.
John Wayne.
John Wayne International, I'm sorry. I heard from somebody that Leonardo DiCaprio read Absurdistan.
Okay, that's a natural. I think that's a good choice.
He wants to get circumcised.
Yeah.
So that was all I've heard about that. So no Hollywood.
Have you been published in Russia? And if you were published in Russia, what's the response there?
Oh, I've been published in Russia. Look, the kinds of books I write, everyone's going to hate you. So I've had Jews, Russians, Azeris, for this book alone, Georgians, Armenians, Italians, Germans, a nutria farmer in Alberta, Canada. You know, there's going to be a lot of hatred. And I use some very randy language as well. In Russia, my first book was published. It was not the best translation. I even helped out a little bit. It's hard to translate. Jesus Christ, I'm so glad I'm not a translator. Very hard work. The book was and the cover was And I think most Russian reviews were sort of, what's the saying in Russian? Salo ruskoye едят. In other words, he still eats our lard, even though he criticizes us.
What does that mean?
Who the hell knows? I don't know. What does that mean?
We don't have that in English so much. Still, his fists are in our Cheerios, and yet
Would you like to be my Russian translator?
Yeah.
Both have very distinct and well-developed styles. Do you ever feel that you sort of react to your own style by trying to do something different or trying not to be formulaic?
Yeah, I think that it seems to me that's one of the big challenges, especially as you get older, because the truth is there's probably about a tiny sliver of your, you only work within a tiny sliver really. When you actually get to the part of your writing that's any good, it's coming out of a tiny fraction of your personality. And to not repeat out of that, I think is kind of hard. And I don't think there's really an answer except kind of be willing to screw up. I'd say for every story that I finish, there's probably 5 that are like you're talking about. And when you get to the end, you think, no, that is different. But so I think that's just, I don't know, I'm 47, and I find that not only in art, but in life, that's the big thing, is to say, as your faculties crumble and you start getting less, kind of less young, there's a tendency to want to go to the shore, and fog hat, that's music, and it's not, honestly, I kind of joke, but I think if if there's anyone here over 30, it's sort of neurological. You get a little bit, you get afraid to push off into the ocean. So I think in writing especially, it's really scary. If you've had any success, to take that risk that you actually took the first time you wrote a story, which you kind of said, I don't give a shit. I just don't want to suck anymore. And I'm going to try to do something. I don't care. There is no me to dishonor. I'm just going to go ahead. And I think as you get older, it becomes harder because now suddenly there is a you to dishonor. And so, yeah, it's a good question.
Yeah, I'm also trying to ward off dementia.
I don't think that's what he asked.
Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, right. Never mind. Well, right. I don't want to fall into a rut, of Shteyngart. That would be the worst
the
thing.
fact that you've thought that word up is very scary.
It's so scary. My fluffer suggested it. Well, I try to vary the kind of stuff I write by doing a lot of stuff that's not fiction. I do a lot of travel writing. That's one of my favorite modes. So I'm a contributing editor to Travel and Leisure, and they always send me to places where they wouldn't send anyone else. I get to prance around Baku and all the different stands, and so that's kind of fun because you keep yourself in check. You feel like you're doing a job. You're telling a reader what they can expect in one of these countries. And that really has been such a wonderful experience for me, not to be just me all the time, not to be on all the time, So that's
one thing I noticed. It kind of relates to an earlier question. When I've been doing some writing for GQ, this sort of travel type stuff, and it's weird how if you're a funny writer or a satirical writer, an aging one, and you go out into the world and you see things that are a little too beautiful to be directly satirical about, things that move you, and then there's that saying happiness writes white, and I think virtue also is a problem. If you're used to being kind of a smartass, you see something that really moves you, and for me, I find it hard to get sort of prose purchase on something if it's too beautiful. And so that's been one way of challenging myself, is to go to like Nepal and see this. There's this little boy who was meditating for 10 straight months with no food or water. And, you see him, and suddenly you're like, oh, not so funny now, are you, buddy? And it's, and so.
So could each of you talk a little bit about what might be coming next?
Honestly, I got a year off of teaching starting about now. And for the first time in my adult life, I don't really have anything planned. And I'm kind of just trying to stay there for a couple of weeks and see if, something not having something right in front of me might encourage me to go a little bigger. So I'm trying to actively not to have too much planned, really. I took a trip for a journalism piece from, I drove the whole border from Mexico, or from Brownsville to San Diego, 2,500 miles. So I'm kind of finishing up that piece now, like a kind of a travel piece. And after that, it's just writer's block.
I'm starting to use junk again, and no. I'm not starting to use junk again, not this time. You got it, oh, nice. I'm in page 42 and a half of my new book. I don't know, I can just throw some themes at you: immortality, nanotechnology, the debt crisis, hair loss, Korean evangelicals. That always gets the biggest laugh. It's funny because I just read to the Korean Evangelicals Association. Even they were fairly amused. So those are some of the fun topics that I'll be perusing. What will come of it? We'll see. This is an exciting time, also a very scary time, because I don't know how it will all end up. But it's fun to toss all these things in a pot and watch them bubble.
Do you think there's less humor in Russia now than there used to be?
Russia's always funny. It doesn't always mean to be funny, but it's the one thing. My friends in there, many of them lead lives that are not so great, even though they're very well educated and things like that. But one thing that they've kept, even more so than we have in the diaspora, is their sense of humor. Which is astounding, and a lot of it is political humor. And for a while, Yeltsin was fun because he was drunk, but he was still something of a Democrat. But now Putin is around, and he's a wonderful target for just the kind of humor that Russians have always had. My friends and I were just in a humorous fight at something called Club Kangaroo in St. Petersburg, where we got thrown out for criticizing the G8. So it's a funny country.
It's actually for George, but I guess both of you can also say that. I read one of your Shouts and Murmurs a few months ago in the New Yorker, which referenced a lyric from a Black Eyed Peas song.
Yeah.
And I was sort of wondering what kind of influence pop culture and music and that sort of stuff plays into your writing.
Well, I really love it. I mean, I enjoy it. And so I guess my wife and I have two teenage daughters, 18 and 16. So my attitude is just wallow in it because it's there. And for better or worse, that kind of is our culture, at this point. So I kind of like it, and then I also kind of despise it, have a real contempt for it, because I think it's mind-rotting. And I think this might be a little too much, but I think we're kind of in Iraq because of our pop culture, that we spent so much time honoring the idea that shit's actually important. OJ, it's important. Monica, that's important. Even now, you think about school shootings. the weird thing, is it really that important? Would your life really be different if you'd never heard about that? It'd probably be better. So in a certain way, I think that a lot of this stuff that's very fun drifts in and subtly erodes the critical faculty. So when suddenly we're on the brink of war with Iraq, we're still kind of thinking about Scott Peterson. And I have kind of a love-hate relationship, in other words. I really love it. I enjoy riffing on it. I've loved it since I was a little kid. But also I think there's a little bit of a blowback from it that we're suffering in culture. So I just kind of like to accept it as a valid topic for literature because, all of us know, for example, the mythology of the Brady family, right? I mean, this is the New Yorker event here. This, you're like the cream of the crop. But if I say, oh, she's a real Jan, everybody knows. So I think you can't ignore that, and it's actually kind of fun to know that. And I think you also have to recognize that there is a sort of a complicated effect. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that My Hump song really got to me. I know that.
I sing that all the time in the shower.
Yeah, it's
my
catchy.
Humpty Hump,
Yeah.
my lovely hump.
Is there ever any hesitation, because you do it so well, in mining humor and racial stereotypes? Is that ever give you thought?
Is there any hesitation in mining racial stereotypes humor? Right. Well, because I'm an immigrant, they gave me a little carte blanche to do this. Not a lot. And as growing up my whole life is, first growing up in Russia, which was very anti-Semitic, then moving to America, where I was considered a Russian. And even though I went to Hebrew school, people would always beat me up for being a Russian. Remember, this was 1980, so there were all these movies, Red Dawn, Red Hamster, So even though I'm, as white as you can be in front of this panel, I've still been, all my life has been people trading in ethnic stereotypes, and with myself usually being taking the brunt of them. So does that excuse me from the kind of horrible stuff I purvey in Absurdistan? Not at all. Not at all. And let's end it on that. Yeah.
That's honest.
That's honest. Yeah. Thank you.
All right. Well, I want to thank everybody for coming tonight, and thank Gary and George especially.